Today we sit down with Rebecca from Reading the Pattern and Child Bornhold from Twitter of Time. We're going to look at episode 2 of The Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime, and we're also going to make fun of white cloaks. So that'll be fun. Stick around. Welcome back to another episode of What Were They Thinking, in which I and my guests will perform my signature crap analysis of episode 2 of The Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime. If you missed the first episode, you can check out the description below for the link, and you're probably also wondering what my crap analysis is. Well, in short, we will compare and contrast the episode to the books. We will reverse engineer the decision-making process regarding any additions, subtractions, alterations, etc. We will anticipate the ripple effect those additions, subtractions, alterations might have on future plot lines. And then finally, we will predict the direction the show is going to take based upon the previous discussion. Now, joining me today are two wonderful members of our fandom. The first is a well-known content creator. You probably have heard of her, and if you haven't, you really should go check her out. She is the queen of foreshadowing. You probably know her as Rebecca from Reading the Pattern. Also joining us today is the white cloak that everyone loves to hate or hates to love, Child Bornhold from Twitter of Time, aka Josh. Welcome, Rebecca and Josh. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Full warning, this is a spoiler-full episode. All episodes of this show are complete book and show spoilers, from New Spring all the way to Memory of Light. If you have not read all of the books and you do not want spoilers, you should not watch this episode until you're finished with the series. Dane, what are your thoughts on that opening scene?
So I should say this. So the Dane that most people may know on Twitter is not the Josh that was introduced. So we should say that. So Josh is not as big of a fan of white cloaks as maybe it would seem that Dane portrays to be, for those that are familiar with Twitter of Time. But it was one of the, it was pretty jarring, I think, coming in. I was not expecting that at all. On one hand, I was excited just because I do moonlight, I guess, as a white cloak online for fun. But when it started and I realized what was happening, I was like, oh man, this is not going to be good. The one thing though that I really like about this opening though was that it showed, coming off of the first episode where you have that creature feature evil with the Trollocs and the Fade, it shows that there's a human evil too. And so I really liked that they added that part in, that you have that white cloak human evil versus the creature evil, to add in the more serious issues that are there in the world. So it was very interesting. And I love the play on color there too. I mean, it's bright white, and that's something that stuck out to me when I was rewatching it, preparing. You have that beautiful field of green, and then you have this jarring white. And a lot of times we see white and we think, like holy or purity or things, and then this really dark thing happens, right? So it was very, very jarring. A little eating the bird was a little much too, but that's a white cloak delicacy. So
is Dane going on record as saying that the white cloaks are evil?
Josh is going on record as saying the white cloaks suck. The Dane that's here with Hopper was loving the whole thing. Yeah, we Dane watched that on repeat.
Rebecca, did you have any thoughts about how they portrayed the white cloaks in that first opening scene?
I agree with Josh. I think that was one of the things that stood out to me was, in episode 1, they've established, a primary antagonist, the Shadow, in the form of the Trollocs, the Fade. And then right from the beginning in episode 2, I thought it was great that they're introducing this second antagonist, a human antagonist, and giving us a very clear idea of how seriously we should take this threat, which is very seriously based on what we can see here. And Valdo was such a vivid character right from the beginning. It was even the very first like shot of him, really, because you start with that the boy who's bringing the dish, the bird. The very first shot of Valdo, he's like looking straight at the camera.
The White Cloaks were really leveled up in the show from the books. Like in the books, they're almost written like stormtroopers.
A little, yeah.
They don't. I don't think they actually ever kill any Aes Sedai in the books. I think there was one point at which I think somebody mentioned somebody like hanging an Aes Sedai once, but that was not. You never see anything actually happening to the Aes Sedai. They talk. The Aes Sedai talk a lot about like a White Cloak arrow in the back, but it's like this existential threat. There's never any actual evidence that the White Cloaks are effective at hunting Aes Sedai. Yeah. But here, he is clearly very successful.
Yeah. They made them much more formidable. That's another thing that I really liked about it. There are a few things really with the White Cloaks that I liked. The other we may even talk about later, but that was one of them, was that they're much more formidable in the show. And that's, I've seen everyone talk about changes that they liked and that they didn't like, and it seems like the White Cloaks, and a lot of things I haven't seen very many conversations about it, but they did a really good job with them. I feel like Rebecca was saying and kind of echoing what I was saying, like they're formidable. They're a good antagonist.
These White Cloaks don't need brown pants.
Here we go.
Up until Karen, at least. What did you think about the hands?
I think it served a bit to explain how he was managing to get this Aes Sedai in this position where she's under his control. It gives you the sense that maybe somehow that is one of the first things that he does. I mean, or at least he is, that the hands are a focus, right? So if he manages to prevent her from using her hands, then she isn't able to use her abilities against him. So it helps explain a little bit, I think, how he's able to do this.
If we jump ahead to later in the season when they capture Perrin and Egwene, I was thinking a lot about that, because they had Egwene seated in the chair, strapped in, and it looked very clear like they had chopped off hands in that chair before.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But if you think, how would you get an Aes Sedai into that chair in the first place? Like, I can't imagine Moiraine being in that chair and not defending herself.
Right. I think that this is, again, one of the things I feel that they added to the show that works out. And I think maybe we see it holistically in the season. The Aes Sedai using all the hand emotions, it seems like them much longer to channel than what I believed it did in the books. And maybe that's just part of tower training, right? That they have specific things that they need to do in order to channel, but it does make it believable that if an Aes Sedai has to take some time in order to channel, that it's quite possible that a group of White Cloaks could grab her hands in enough time to prevent her from channeling. And Moiraine she is a tough cookie, so I'm sure she could hold her own, but 4 or 5 strong guys grabbing a hold of each arm and holding her down, she's gonna struggle a bit.
I feel like maybe they're leaving it a little bit to our imagination, right? Like they're not showing us a scene where he captured this woman. Like she's already captured. We know that he knows the hands. Again, if we look at the later scene in episode 5, we know that he knows the hands are important. So if he can disable her hands somehow, then he has the upper hand at that point. He has some control at that point. So, I mean, I'm just imagining, in a case like with this Aes Sedai here, because she's kind of clearly dressed as an Aes Sedai, maybe there's no question then, if a white cloak like Valda sees an Aes Sedai like this, he just goes for it. Maybe like there's no waiting to question first. It's just you do whatever you can to secure her hands, and then from there, escalate. But that's how I'm imagining it. But maybe it's better to sort of leave it to the imagination rather than showing it, because if you show it, maybe there's ways to pick it apart. But if you leave it to the imagination and you kind of have a general sense of it, you can come up with some scenarios that might work.
Right. When he was asking Moiraine why he couldn't go back across, like she was telling him that she couldn't allow him to go back. She said to him she can't let him go back because she couldn't let him give the Trollocs a way to cross. Why didn't she just tell him, if you go back, you will die? I would think that would be more compelling.
She said it that way really because that's telling the audience what really matters to Moiraine. That's letting us know what her main concern is. But you're right that it might have been more compelling to him. I guess the counter argument would be, I mean, that should be kind of obvious. Like, you see these massive monsters across the way, and this guy was just so focused on, oh, but my son is going to be there, that he didn't care about like what would happen to him. So maybe her saying that isn't gonna convince him. I mean, I don't think anything would have convinced him with the way he was acting. Like, he was just,
I agree. I mean, if you can't look across that river and see what's waiting for you, and not be
yeah,
and not need that extra nudge to not go back. But I mean, as
yeah,
a father myself, your children puts you in a weird mindset, right? I mean, you're looking
yeah.
across the river at that the Trolloc horde and all of that, and he's worried about his son that should be there at any moment. And I think he's crazy, but part of me gets it. I'm like, hey, might need to get back over there and help my family somehow. But at the same time, Moiraine can't risk it, right? Because they will coerce him to ferry them over too. So I think in that sense, she had to be serious and say what she did and ultimately do what she did.
You could say, okay, well, once he's jumped in after the ferry, which is again obviously kind of really stupid idea on his part, what does he think is going to happen? But once he's done that, in theory, she could have used the power to like pull him out. Why doesn't she do that? And I mean, the only thing I can really think on that is she's near exhaustion already from using the power so much that she is not going to waste any of her energy on that when she knows she needs it for keeping the rest of them alive.
Right.
Also, Hightower says, hey, the White Cloaks are right. You can't trust those witches, so.
Yep. Which was a nice tie-in to the beginning, right? That they included that line. I think that was a nice little connection that they drew there. I like that.
Trust Dane to catch that. I like your explanation, because another thought had occurred to me, and your explanation answers that completely, which is, why didn't she just stand on the riverbank and just start throwing fireballs at the Trollocs and just kill them all? But you're right, she was injured, she was exhausted, she didn't have energy to waste on killing all those Trollocs when they don't know how many more are after them. They don't know how they got there. So there was a lot of unknowns, and she needed to.
And it goes back to what she said in episode 1 too, is that basically like, there's so many coming, like I can't handle them. We need to get away from them because I can't handle them by myself. It's a really big force. But I do like that we saw them, we see that they're that close. We can see that she's right, that they're pursuing, because otherwise, we wouldn't get that. I mean, in the book, we don't see that big a force of shadow spawn again until like right before Shudder Logoth, which isn't that much time in this episode, but still, I think it's important to see that for all the characters to see that too. Like, yeah, they're coming.
So the next thing I was looking at was the dream sequence, which in the books that happens at the Stag and Lion in Bearlawn, which
Yeah,
obviously we don't
it's
have.
not here.
We don't go to
Yeah.
Bearlawn. And that means that because we don't go to Bearlawn, we don't get introduction to Child Bornhold.
We don't.
It's horrible. Can't believe I got cut. No.
Hope lives on.
We don't know for sure that you've been cut. We just haven't been introduced to you yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Father,
True.
the good Child Bornhold. Did I say that? Sorry.
You did, and you're recording this too, right?
Uh-oh.
I am recording this. So, but the other thing was that the dream was bats.
Mhm.
The dream was bats, not rats.
Yeah.
Now, why would you think they would use bats instead of rats?
I think a lot of the changes in this episode stem from the decision not to use Bearlawn as a location. Because we kind of skipped over that, but I think if we look at a lot of the things that are different, it kind of comes down to that. So as you said, we're finding different locations for things like where are we going to encounter the White Cloaks? Then in this case, it's like, where are they going to have the dream? And I just looked at it as, well, if we're in the woods instead of in a city,
Right.
Rats don't make as much sense. So picking a different creature might be a little bit more fitting for the location. That was really the main reason I could think of, because otherwise, well, and it's also, I don't know why they decided to do the pulling out of the mouth thing, but you couldn't really do that with a rat. Works with a bat, not so much with a rat. So I don't know, but I think it mainly has to do with the location. That was my thought.
I think it'd be almost more disgusting if it was a rat than a bat.
It would, but rats also seem like, how does that even fit in your mouth? Rat is bigger. Oof, I don't know.
That was a huge bat that came out of that mouth,
True, but they like the wings fold in. I can't believe we're having this conversation, but anyway.
That was another gross scene. Honestly, it was we come in with that cold opening with honestly Valdi eating the bird. Gross.
The hands.
Seeing the hands, just a little much, right? And then Rand starts coughing, and then he reaches in, and like in my mind, like I'm thinking, oh man, he's about to cough up a rat, right? Like this is that scene that's gonna happen. And then instead, it was the bat. I was like, oh man, it's just there's a lot of interesting choices, I think, from that factor. But I like what you said here, though. I mean, that because I think that's true, right? They're not in an inn where you might expect to see like a rat. They're basically near what seemed to be like a cave, so a bat makes more sense. And like you said, like even though they skipped Bearlawn, right? They still have the White Cloak meeting, right? And they're still having the dream sequence. So they kept the main things, even though it's kind of been adjusted, right?
When they just made the decision not to do Bearlawn, they had to think like, okay, what happened in Bearlawn? What do we do with all of those events? Like, how do we, work those in? And Rafe pretty much told us like why they didn't do Bearlawn, or at least why they don't do all the locations, because he talked about how if they want it to look as good as it can look, they can't do every location that is mentioned and visited in books. They have to pare it down, or else the locations won't look good.
Right. I think honestly, I think it's even beyond just the cost of making the sets of those towns, those locations, it's just the time on screen.
Yeah.
They're so limited in how much time they can dedicate towards these specific things. Like trying to add in that scene in Bearlawn would have taken easily a quarter of an episode.
Yeah, and then the pacing slows down, right? That's the other thing about the way this episode was handled, is like the pacing is pretty quick, and you get that sense of urgency that is never really abates. They're always on the move. The shadow spawn are always after them. They don't get this little sequence where they're like, oh, okay, we're in Bearlawn, we can like relax and check out the city a little bit. No, we don't get that. And it reminded me of the adaptation of the Fellowship of the Ring, because so much is cut from those like early chapters. Every time there's a chapter where they're like having some downtime in the middle of their chase, like that's gone, and they just keep like the pace all the way up through Bree, and they never stop.
There was one point before we get to the White Cloak encounter, where Rand pulled his normal, whiny Rand distrust of Moraine and starts yelling at her, which is a minor change, because he doesn't really start yelling at her in the books until the Dragon Reborn, until like the third book.
Yeah,
that's
it was different.
But she, Moraine is fed up with him and says, "This is fine, you can go wherever you want." And he's like, "How come I don't believe that you let us go?" And then she looks at him and says, "I've run out of patience and time," and rides off.
Yeah.
What is she thinking? Like, is that like reverse psychology? Like, what do you think she's doing here? Because that seems very counter to everything that she's been working up to.
Yeah, no, I think she's fed up at this point. I think she was ready to. I think there probably is some of that reverse psychology. I mean, they know that the Trollocs and whatnot are behind them. They've just woken up to a circle of bats on the right on the ground. Like they've all kind of shared this same experience, so they know that they can't deny that something's coming for them and that they need to get out of town. And she's really their only ticket to what they're really considering to be safety, right? So that she knows that they're going to follow them. The one thing here that I wish that they would have done is the fact that Rand is so out of character for me in this scene, where he's a little more cranky, right? He's a little more what was he named? Brother Sensitive, I think was what he was coined. I wish that earlier, when she was going through and healing the horses and Lan was telling her not to reserve strength, that she would have come across Bella to be healed. So that way we get later on, maybe we get a scene back to Rand healing her on air during any time or something. That way we had some sort of explanation maybe to why Rand was so cranky, more than just puking a bat. Sure spoils everybody's breakfast. I think it would have been neat to tie into some reasons of why that mood change had happened, that maybe possibly it was because he had channeled and he's showing issues from that. So but yeah, I think she knows that they're going to come, and it's psychology, and she's got to call them out, right? She's got to call the bluff a bit too, right? She can't let him stand there and talk her down. She's got to keep moving and being the head of leadership that they've got. So she's not going to just stand there and make it. So
yeah, I was wondering the same thing about, like, could he have channeled, and that might explain some of his change in behavior in this episode, because he's the way he's kind of going after Moraine and Egwene. But the other explanation that I think we can point to is we do see that there was a scene between him and Tam, where Tam basically, it's drawing from the books, that fever dream where he's talking about how he found Rand as a baby. And so that's another possibility here, is that even if Rand hasn't channeled yet, he has heard something that is world shattering, and that might explain this change, because you even see it at the very end of episode 1, where Moraine has just healed Tam, but Rand isn't grateful. He just like goes right after her and is like, you just showed up, and then the shadow spawn showed up, and that's like right after this thing has happened with Tam. And it's probably not even if he had somehow channeled on during the Trolloc attack, it wouldn't maybe be enough time to get that that reaction. But I think having just heard something world shattering, maybe that explains his change in behavior, even if he hasn't channeled. But I do think a little bit that, yeah, Moraine is using some reverse psychology or calling his bluff a little bit. And the evidence for that is the way that Lan kind of hangs back and watches for them as she goes on. Like, yeah, she's going to be like, yep, all right, I'm leaving you. I'm done with you. But, she's still keeping an eye out for him. But it's funny because, again, talking about foreshadowing later in the season, the very last episode again, where she does let him go.
When they came to the White Cloaks, it was interesting to me that Moiraine said to them, to the kids, I'm a lady from a fallen house and you are under my care. Nobody questions that.
No.
Nobody asks her, like, I thought you can't lie. Like, what is this?
Right. No one seems to pick up that, in fact, she's telling the literal truth there. She couldn't say that if she wasn't actually a lady from a fallen house. So, but no one seems to quite catch on to that. So that is interesting. Yeah. It was such a cool scene, just as a way of really showing us, rather than telling us, how that oath works, right? What can she say? How does she mislead? And that was so cool, the way that Egwene afterwards is like, you lied to him.
Right.
And she's like, did I? Really can look at everything she says and, see how she can say it, how everything she said was true, but managed to mislead.
For new viewers too, or new fans to the show too, then you're questioning from that point forward, or you're really paying attention to everything she says, because then it's neat. It was always neat, even with the books, to like, you really pay attention to what's being said, because it becomes a game almost at that point. It's like, oh, am I going to catch this person? Well, what if they're not telling the truth here? So it was really neat how they did that, how they added that in, I thought too. So, and she does tell them be quiet too before that, right? She's like, don't ask questions, don't say nothing. Here's the story. Here's what we're going to
don't talk about this, don't talk about that, don't say anything.
I found it very interesting that they made Valda a questioner. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, my thought was, and this kind of ties into like, why are they including Valda as a character at this point early on? And I think what we have basically with these two characters of Valda and Bornhald, and we met Valda first, so our very first impression of the White Cloaks is, oh, this just like pure evil, like sadistic, and then you meet Bornhald. Well, I don't even think they gave him a name, but we know it's Bornhald Senior. And he, in comparison, is clearly more moderate, which I think is in keeping with who he was in the first book. Like, we see him as a little bit more moderate in comparison, in that case, to Child Buyer, as kind of the more extreme one in that case. So I think it was to set up this idea that there are factions within this group of the White Cloaks, and some are more extreme and some are less so. And I think that was kind of important. And so that's kind of how I see the decision-making process is, like, we want to have a more moderate one, we want to have a more extreme one. And then, like, looking at the big picture, I can definitely see why they would have Valda over, say, a Buyer as the more extreme one, in to be introduced early on. And then I kind of, it's sort of like they're combining some characters maybe, right? Because Valda was not a questioner, but if we think about the questioners that we meet, they do tend to be more extreme. So it kind of fits in that, again, there's this more extreme faction within a extremist group. And then I think they went the other way with Bornhald and made him maybe even a little bit more moderate than he was in the book, just again, because you want to very quickly establish the difference between them. And so, like, when he says, go find an Aes Sedai to heal your wound, he probably wouldn't go that far in the book, but you want to very quickly show the difference between the two of them is not just in their style. It's not just that Bornhald is polite and Valda is like, going right up and touching Moiraine. There's substantive differences between the two of them as well.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up. So Dane, when Daddy Bornhald told Moiraine to find an Aes Sedai to heal her wound, because only Aes Sedai could heal Charlotte wounds, how did that make you feel? Do you feel betrayed by your TV father? And what would Buyer say?
It's known that the Bornhalds are drinkers, so it's quite possible that Pops had one too many that morning. It was a trap, okay, and I don't even like this question. Just next question. Let's just think about it.
Okay, so
No. I think he was no, he was I agree. I think I mean Rebecca is killing it with the breakdowns. Honestly, I think that she's spot on with it. I think that with Valda, I think they're combining characters. I think that Valda is definitely the more zealous side, right? Like I think for in the world of the Wheel of Time, the Children of the Light are your like a religious type faction, right? And you've got your zealots, and that's definitely Valda. And then you have Bornhold who comes in, who's as she was saying, a little bit more moderate, or even the way I approach this view of it from a religious aspect. And I'll try to be careful because I'm, not to be offensive at all for anyone, but you do have some of your certain religions or beliefs that may be more tolerant of things, while not maybe also being accepting of things, but being more tolerant. And we do see that, I think, a bit with Bornhold, as he does say, hey, this wound is only something that can be healed by an Aes Sedai. So if you go this way and you happen upon one, maybe you'll find her. Right now, I don't think that doesn't mean that if Bornhold and the others catch her in the act, that they're not going to choppy some hands, maybe. I don't know. But at the same time, you see two different sides there, right? You see Bornhold, who may be a little more tolerant of things and not accepting them, and then you may see Valda, who's like, no, this thing is, to use just religious language, is a cold hard sin, and this is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to be. And you might have Bornhold, who's more like, well, we'll let the light decide, light will judge, and light willing, we'll see where this leads and where this goes. So it's an interesting question for Papa Bornhold on what he was thinking there.
Speaking of of Valda as the questioner and the zealot, looking ahead, seeing how this affects future plot lines in the story, two questions that come to mind are do you think they are merging his character with Asunawa, who was the head questioner, and more importantly, we know later on that Valda is challenged to a duel by Galad and loses, and Galad becomes the Lord Captain Commander. Actually, even taking a step back, Valda becomes the Lord Captain Commander after Pedron Nile dies. So how do you think that's going to play out now that Valda is a questioner?
I think that those are some characters that have been merged. In my opinion, I think Valda is going to be more of a recurring character. I don't think that he's done. We didn't see him die on screen. So I think he's going to come back with a vengeance. And I think that he's probably been merged with Asunawa. I don't know. I think we all had the idea that Bornhold is maybe going west, maybe to run into the Shan later on. But I don't know. Like, is Nile still Lord Captain Commander? Because Bornhold had that nice gold sun thing too. So I think almost it would be interesting to even see kind of where that leads, because Nile is ultimately he gets axed later on in the books too. So it's interesting to see, I think, where they're going to go with. I care way more about the White Cloaks in the show than I ever did about what was going to happen to the White Cloaks books. Like, I think it's going to be interesting to see how things play out.
It's so hard to say because they could go in so many different directions with it. But I certainly do expect that we're going to have a lot fewer major White Cloak characters in the show. Like, we're not going to have all of these ones. Like, I think we might end up with like a couple more, major players among the White Cloaks, throughout, and not including Galad, because he's kind of his own character. But so is that Dane? Is there a Pedron Nile in there? I don't know. But I don't think anybody else is a guarantee as a named character to show up, because I think they're going to combine quite a few. The
Mhm.
one thing I've seen people speculate about that I kind of hope they don't do is combining Valda with Jacob Carradine, who is another questioner character, only because we also find out that he is a dark friend. And I would like Valda to
Yeah.
not be a dark friend. I would rather have this zealot, this evil kind of zealotry not be also a dark friend. I think there needs to be some of those examples of people who do evil without being sworn to the dark one.
It's fun to think about how they're going to handle this leading towards the end, because if you work back from the end, the importance to Galad becoming the Lord Captain Commander is that he's a well-liked, well-respected, strong leader who's a voice of reason, and
Yeah.
he begins the reformation of the White Cloaks,
Right.
and he basically says, he says to his friend Trom, I believe, towards the end, he says, "Do you think we're going to fight at the last battle without fighting alongside Aes Sedai?" But the point is that Galad leads that reformation, and that in order to do that, he needs to be the Lord Captain Commander.
Right.
In the book, that happens from him defeating
Valda.
So if Valda doesn't become the Lord Captain Commander and be
How does
channeled,
Galad become Lord Captain?
they need to either they need to have some other mechanism for Galad to become the Lord Captain Commander, or some other mechanism for the White Cloaks to undergo this reformation, or, which is
So they don't.
probably more likely, maybe they just leave it out. So what did you think about the Song of Manetheren?
Awesome way to tell it, right? I mean, awesome way to bring it in. And I was afraid they were gonna like cut that part out. But when they started the when the singing started, and you understood what he was singing, I was like, oh man, this is awesome, and I love the way that it was just the whole way that it was even composed, like the way it was kind of had like that sing song feel to it, and Perrin, coming in with the deep repeating part, like, man, it's just awesome. Like I just love how they did that scene. It was great.
Yeah, me too. What a great way to adapt it. You couldn't do it in episode 1. It would have slowed things down too much at the end there, which you just couldn't have had. But you get to bring it in anyway because it does have so much resonance, and you involve the other characters in it. It's not just Maureen delivering a monologue. She still gets to have her monologue, but it's like the other characters are involved. I love the foreshadowing that there was, again, going back to the foreshadowing, but you have foreshadowing for the end of the season as well as the whole end game of the series, when Maureen is telling the story of Eldrine, and we're making the connection to what Amelisa does at the end of the season, and then what will happen to Egwene when all is said and done.
I'm really excited for what we kind of know should happen in the future, and how that's going to be impacted now that their relationship, like Egwene and Rand specifically, has been fleshed out more. That's going to be really interesting to see how that goes.
So speaking of the Rand and Egwene relationship, we see Perrin sitting down, and after he's collecting water. This is when they're stopping for the night at one of the ruins. He sits down because his leg is bothering him, and he rolls up his pants, and you see the festering Trolloc wound from their claws, and that's the introduction to the wolves. The wolves basically corner him, and one of them, which you assume is probably Dapple, because she is the leader, walks over and licks his wounds, and then they leave.
Yeah,
which is weird. So Dane, I would like you to talk to us about Perrin.
Let's see what Hopper might want to say too while we're
You're wearing Hopper, very nice.
Yeah, where I thought you were going to lead. I don't mean to sidetrack for it, but we know that there is like a little love triangle, and Rand and Egwene are chatting down there, and just so happens Perrin is around. Like maybe he was stalking the conversation a bit. I thought maybe you were going to lead into that, and well, maybe he was watching out. But it was interesting. It was my true feeling about it is it was a little lackluster. I wanted a little bit more for the parent wolf relationship when I started. I wanted to see. I don't know maybe what it was that I expected, but I think I just wanted a little bit more. But it does raise the questions of what's going on here. Why didn't these wolves actually attack him? But I think your question was, what do I think about Perrin? And while he is Dane's swore enemy, I think he's done a great job. Marcus has done a fantastic job, I think, of this Perrin. I think there's some changes that have been made to Perrin's character that maybe I don't agree with, but I think that it works. And he definitely is that gentle giant that I expected Perrin to be, especially from the first books. He's kind of has the sensitivity. He's large, he's formidable, he's able to throw his weight around if he needs to, but he's still is gentle, right? And we're seeing him being very sensitive, and so ultimately I'm really enjoying Perrin's character. There's things that I wish weren't changed there. Again, I wish he had the axe. I wish there was something of Perrin there along with him, carrying along from the books. I don't know where they're going to do, where they're going to bring that back in, what they're going to do with that. But I really like Perrin. I'm interested to go on this journey with him and see where his character leads, because he's one of the good characters.
So what you're saying is Dane is interested in going on a journey with Perrin. That's
Dane,
what I got from what you just said.
Dane and Perrin have a journey that I hope, because of how it turns out, that actually they don't cut Dane. I mean, that always ended up, that was actually in the end, that Dane being a recurring character, that was interesting. I thought, Will Time, you have a lot of your recurring characters, right? You have Val and Luca, you have some of the others. But the way that they ended that, I thought was really interesting, because as we were talking about earlier too, with Gallad leading the Reformation, and then what happens between Dane and Bakker, like the White Cloaks can't go back to what they were after the last battle. Like things have changed too much. So.
On the wolf, going back to the wolf question, I do think, overall in the season there was less the wolves and Perrin than we might have hoped for. But I think it's also kind of important to remember, like, a lot for Perrin is set up in book one. Like, I think there's sort of the three key relationships that he has. Well, I don't mean like one-on-one relationships, but just three key kinds of players for him. You have the wolves, you have the White Cloaks, and you have the Tinkers. They're all like huge in Perrin's story, and you have to kind of introduce all of them. And we did get some of all of that for him in season one, but I think relatively speaking, the wolves got like the least amount of development in season one. Yeah.
Because to me that shows, that represents who Perrin is. Like the wolves represent his nature, and the Tinkers and the White Cloaks represent his inner struggle. So I like that you bring that up, and that they actually did touch on everything within the first season.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on how they did Shadow Logoth? Because there was no Mordeth, there was no treasure. Mashadar seemed to be more like almost like a fungal growth rather than a cloud.
I thought, just in terms of the visuals, that the visuals were really great. And like Mashadar was creepier than it might have been otherwise. So I like all those choices. The biggest thing that I found was, in terms of a difference, comes in with like how and why they went there in the first place, right? So, I think they made this change where Moiraine is basically kind of incapacitated at that point. And so she's not really involved in that decision. She's not, agreeing to that decision. And they've set her up as this character who is the one warning against it, right? Before they go there, there's that little scene with her and Lan where she's like, it's too dangerous. And then when she does wake up there and she realizes where they are, it's the, what have you done? You've killed us. So she's the character that's letting the audience know this was a really dangerous idea, like, raising that, the sense of danger and even going there. And all of it falls to Lan. And, in the moment, I think it's pretty clear he made the right choice, the only choice, right? Like, Moraine can't fight. The Shadow Spawn have found them. What else could he have done at that point, right? So it's making a decision that is more dangerous, but we don't have any other choice, right? So I think that they those kind of changes like established that. And then the other big thing with like cutting out Mordeth and some other changes, I mean, for me, the biggest effect is Matt isn't quite as stupid looking. And Rand and Perrin by extension, but it's mainly Matt. They were kind of along for the ride with him. But, in the book, I'm like, okay, like you've gone to this city and you've been told that Trollocs won't even go in here. And then this dude named Mordeth just shows up and is like, I'll give you treasure. And that's like, yes. I mean, it's just so, I don't think you could have done that, because he just looks so young and so dumb. And so it changes all that, right? I mean, Lan does tell the story. He tells the story of how it came to be. He tells them not to touch anything, but you don't have Matt going out and like, oh, let's go explore for fun. When he goes out, it's because he hears, strange noises, and he's like, is there something wrong with the horses? And what's that shadow, that movement, like what's going on? So it's just a different feel, from Matt, and Matt comes off quite a bit better. And not just because of that, but also, in this episode, just throughout, you just see him being a really good friend, good friend to Perrin, good friend to Rand, good friend to Egwene. Like he's being a good friend to everybody in this episode. And he's my favorite character in this episode. Whereas at this point in the book, I was like super annoyed with him. So they changed that pretty big time.
This is one of Matt's best lines in the whole season, which
Yes.
was where he says a couple of things. One, that's more words than you said to us all day, possibly ever. And two, why did you bring us here?
Yeah, Matt gets a lot of good one-liners, I feel like, in this episode, because even earlier, he has that classic of, what was it, until then, let's not make her mad, like the lady that can throw fireballs mad.
Right.
He's got a couple of
He's got some really good ones.
Yeah. But Lan, honestly, I mean, we talked about this earlier with, Hightower jumping in after his ferry, even though, and wanting to go back across, even though he sees the Trollocs in the danger right there, as stubborn as we've seen the Two Rivers folks be, as Lan, you have to clearly spell this out, Matt. You can't go across the street and take a dagger. But Shadow Logoth is, again, it was really neat. I liked that crack too that you mentioned down the middle. It does make you wonder, what happened here, what's caused this city to break and split. What could cause something like that to happen to what is the largest city that we've seen up to this point, and is very, very creepy too when you realize, especially later on, once the horse has been eaten, I guess, by Mashadar, and you realize that all the dust and stuff they've been walking through is just other dead
stuff.
Yeah, that it's like, they did a really great job with upping the creepy factor. The one thing that I do wish, and I guess when we saw the first clip of the dagger, you hear Matt saying, "Let's make a deal." I still thought maybe that part was going to be in here because they've set Matt up for being what I consider a great story. Like I love the poor boy kind of background that he's coming from. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that. Like you're come from a family that's struggling, and you're poor, and he's kind to his sisters, and he's shown a good job of being a good friend, and different things that you kind of want to cheer Matt on, that it makes sense that he would be willing to make a deal, or do whatever for this beautiful dagger that he's just found, you know especially that the big ruby, right? Why wouldn't he go after that? So, but again, we hear the whistle here, right?
Yeah.
And that to me though is I guess a question, maybe even to you, Warder, of why would Fane lead him to the dagger and maybe not take it himself? Where's the connection in the future, with all of that? So it makes me raise some questions, when this is the first, I didn't pick up on Fane and the whistle the first time. I heard other people talk about it, and then when I watched back, I heard it this time, and I'm just wondering, how's it all going to tie together ultimately? Because we know the connection there to the dagger and into those two.
I don't think Fane called him to the dagger.
Mm-hmm.
I think the dagger itself called him. And I like how they set this up, because immediately preceding this, we see Matt sit down next to Perrin and give Perrin his belt knife that Willa had made, and said that like you should have it, or she would want you to have it, or something like that. And that when she gave it to him, she said that she never made weapons, only tools.
Right.
Which makes me wonder, how often would a blacksmith in the Two Rivers be making weapons that she would need to say that she doesn't make weapons?
Yeah.
I'm not even going to go there. I can see why that statement was necessary.
It's setting it up for Perrin, right? Like the whole hammer versus axe dichotomy. Like, I mean, it was a great scene. I love that scene.
Right, exactly. And then he said that he used it for chopping apples or whittling wood 1,000 times before he needed it to defend himself. So does that mean that he fought off a Trolloc with his belt knife? That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, we saw Nynaeve do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But that's Nynaeve. Like, come on.
No.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't
Nynaeve
see it really. I mean,
sword and killed it with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Fane was there. He could, because he could enter Shadow Logoth. He didn't have that inborn genetic fear of Shadow Logoth that the Trollocs had.
Right.
But I think his connection to the dagger is probably what happened in the books, in that he went into Shadow Logoth and he got touched by Mashadar, but because his level of evil was so deep, he didn't get consumed by Mashadar, but he became connected to Mashadar.
Yeah.
I think that's why he has that because if you see by the end, when Perrin and Egwene were on top of the wall, and you look out, you can see that Mashadar was like almost covering like the entire city.
Everything. Yeah.
So if Fane was outdoors at that time, he would have been covered by Mashadar.
Mm-hmm.
But he was so evil. The depth of his evil was so great that it overwhelmed the evil of Mashadar. This leads to like kind of the last big difference, the big branch off, where Rand and Matt escape through that grate in the wall, and they start to go down the river on the log instead of on a riverboat. Perrin and Egwene jump off the wall at a different point, and they cross the river, and Lan and Moraine escape through a hole in the wall. This is a very different visual. In the books, they hear the Trollocs inside the walls, because when the Trollocs had started coming in, because the Fade had pushed them, and something had pushed the Fades to push them to come in. Like that's how scared the Shadow Spawn were. But they try to leave, and that's when they get split up from Mashadar, and they're all on their horses, and they all ride out in different ways. Now that probably would have taken more time, but you still could have had this scene where everybody's riding out and split up in that way. What would you think would be some of the reasoning behind why they chose to have the split up this way? Like, it was very clear how they grouped people here, as opposed to in the books where people kind of just grouped almost randomly. You didn't know who was going to be together until it happened.
You brought up the horses, and because this was one of the things that like jumped out at me the first time I saw the episode. I was like, we don't know what happens to Bella or like most of the horses. You know, obviously one of the horses gets eaten, and we know, you know, we have Lan and Maureen's horses that they get away with those, but the rest of them were like, where's Bella? That's where I was anyway. And I kept thinking she was going to show back up, and she better show back up in episode or season 2. But anyway, I think probably one of the reasons for doing it this way is because they didn't want to keep dealing with horses all the time, right? Like, you know, in Perrin and Egwene's part of the book, they have Bella with them. And that's like, but that's like a part of the story. And I'm guessing they just didn't want to deal with that. So, because horses are difficult to work with in film. And so by having like the horses kind of like scatter and everyone's on foot, that could be one reason. And also I assume similarly with Rand and Matt, they're not going to have them for half an episode on a boat or on a ship. And as much as I love Bail Domon, and I hope that he does make his appearance eventually, I do understand not introducing him at this point when he isn't crucial, and waiting until later when he's going to have more of a storyline to introduce him, and not working in the boat basically when they don't want to use half an episode on that, because really you'd have to do it for at least that to justify doing it at all. You'd have to have them meet Tom on the ship and spend a lot of time there, and it's just not very efficient.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think with the maybe that was one of the reasons why they did that decision with the horses, was so that it kind of releases the duties of having to handle like horses on set from that standpoint. That's a good question. That's not really one that I really even considered. To me, it wasn't a change that didn't make sense, right? I think the way that they introduced Mashadar, and the fact that the Trollocs showed just how afraid of the city that they were, that I'm kind of glad that they didn't force them in, because we really wouldn't have gotten a good idea of what would have caused them to come in. And I think that would have lessened the fear there of that city and Mashadar and whatever could come from that, again, in the future. So I think it was I like that the way it actually ended up working out. As you said, we as book fans are watching it and we kind of know who's going to get split up, but for somebody who is new to it, they have no idea what's happening. So your heart's hurting a bit because Rand and Egwene aren't together, and then you're worried about what could happen from that. And Moraine and Lan are now separated from all of them, and that was their protection, and now they're out on their own. It works out great in my opinion with the changes that were made thus far. How they decided to then leave the city and split up into those groups works. It works great.
Looking back at all of these different alterations, these minor changes that they've made, how do you see it playing out in the future, going down throughout the rest of the series? I know I ask the tough questions.
Well, it's just because I'm we kind of talked about the big one, because I feel like that one of the biggest ones was just the differences with the white cloaks and introducing Valda. Like I feel like that one is a big one that definitely has implications like down the line in the story. But to me, this episode was, of all the episodes in the season, actually the closest to the source material. I think, like, at least the changes were fairly straightforward, or like the kind of changes that I think are a little bit easier to prepare for, the idea of like, condensing some things and putting some things in like different locations, but nothing too crazy. And I don't think a lot of the changes that were in this episode necessarily have long-term implications outside of Valda, because that's the biggest one for me.
Which makes sense, and again, not every episode is going to have ramifications that will give indications towards the direction of the show going forward. So,
or some of them we've already seen, right? Like, so if you didn't know when they were going to introduce Min, you'd maybe have that question of like, when and how is Min going to come into the story? But we know the answer to that. Like, that was a decision that stemmed from removing Barrelon. But also you could look at it and go, well, it's not just that. They also wanted to introduce her later because of what she brings to the story, right? You want her to bring that information to the story later on. You don't want her to bring that now. It's too soon.
There are also some other things that we didn't discuss these implications, but they didn't have any of the sword training with Lan.
Yeah, that is.
They didn't have the training with Tom.
Yeah,
and forgetting Barrelon for us, or forgetting the boat.
Yeah,
where Tom is training them on the boat. They because they don't meet him in White Bridge, and where they get attacked by the Fade, they don't get his instruments. They don't fend for themselves and earn their keep by juggling and playing in the inns. And there was at least one other place. There's further along in Kyrian in the Great Hunt. Rand plays the flute.
Yeah.
So there are. I wouldn't necessarily say that these are directions. These I guess you would call these other ripple effects that would not happen because of that. But I'm thinking more in terms of the direction of the show, meaning like I guess major decisions. And I don't know that I think you're right. I don't know that there are necessarily any major decisions, major plot lines that we can predict based on this specific episode, because this is more of a transitionary episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a good point you brought up about the training with Lan, and because we didn't get it later either, and and because by the end of the season Rand is off on his own, it's not like we're going to get it in between the seasons or anything either. Like we need to somehow bring Rand and Lan back together to get that. And I do miss that. And that's one of the things that I noticed in this episode too, is like there was more not antagonism, not just between Rand and Moiraine, but also between Rand and Lan, which kind of follows. But like you see a couple times them giving each other like looks, and there's no bonding, between the two of them. And we never really get that. And I do think that is an important relationship for Rand in the series. And I would love to see that brought in at some point somehow. I'm not sure how we're going to bring that in or when, but I do miss the sword training, and I do miss the bonding with Lan. Right, I hope that that's not gone forever, because I like it.
That mentorship does play an important role in Rand's development. That's a good point.
It does. So I still want that. I'm still hoping it comes in somehow, because I do think it's important and I would miss it.
Me too. It threw me for a curve, and bringing this up, it was one of the things that I actually had written down is, I guess you could count it as a change because it was missing, right? And then that was one of the biggest things I missed in this, was that the boys never get any of that training from Lan, but specifically Rand and Lan, they don't have that relationship. And now in the Eye of the World, they don't have it immediately either. But when we do see it starts getting built is at the beginning of the Great Hunt. We've been away from them for a bit, and it seems like they've formed a bond. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, I don't know how it's going to end, but maybe between season 1, season 2, we're going to come back. Season 2, we're going to see them training, but then Rand leaves. And I'm still left here thinking like, but what about Rand and Lan?
What about
Like,
Lan?
and it is very important. Oh man, it's something that I was really hoping. I don't know how they're going to do it. Hopefully they'll bring it back. I feel like that would be something that would be a huge loss, not having that mentorship there. I know that there's a lot of things that can be said, a lot of things that have been said about Bookland and how things are handled, but the way Lan is in the show, I think, is a great example of the type of, I guess, manliness or masculinity that I think that the world is sorely missing. And I want this Lan to show this Rand how to handle things. There's one thing that's always stood out to me with Lan. There's a quote that he says, that he tells him, and you might know this better than any of us, so tell me if I'm doing it wrong, but that whatever a man comes, face it on your feet is the thing he teaches to Rand. And one of my favorite, we talked about talking about foreshadowing, is far out when he's facing the Dark One at the end and he's getting beat up and he's kind of there in the fetal position. In my mind, I like to think that comes back to him, because you see Rand stand up and face the Dark One, one more time. And that's a callback, I think, to the training and things that Lan gave him. So they've got to have that relationship.
The exact quote is, "There's one rule above all others to be a man. Whatever comes, face it on your feet."
There it is. Yeah. And he does that in the end, and I love it. I love that callback to that, how he stands up, to the Dark One last time, and that's the time he does it. And you learn that from Lan. They got to get them together.
Are you tearing up over a warder's relationship, Michael?
A little bit. Talking about it, I kind of got chills a little bit.
I did too.
Hey, right, they did a good job. They did a good job with that. I have to give the warders their credit. Especially Lan. I guess he knows what he's talking about. I guess.
I guess he does.
You're not going to disagree with that.
Can I get that in writing?
No. We're going to pretend this never happened.
Just wrap yourself in Hopper and forget the whole thing.
Yeah, Hopper was getting a little toasty in here today, so.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up episode 2. Thank you both for joining me. This has been a blast. I can't think of a better word for it. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome time talking with you guys.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. And if you have anything to add to the conversation, any thoughts, anything we might have missed, anything you disagree on, please feel free to leave a respectful comment below or ping me on Twitter at MALKIER'S King. We would love to continue this conversation. Please join me next month as we look at episode 3 with Matt Hatch, everyone's favorite innkeeper, and Ebony from Dragonmount. This is MALKIER'S King, signing off.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, please subscribe, hit the like button, give us a thumbs up, or leave us a comment. We love comments, especially positive ones. And if you have any friends that are interested in the Wheel of Time, please share some of our videos with them. And as always, a huge thank you to our sponsor, Tor Books, as well as our amazing Patreon community. And if you are interested in learning about how more of the show was made or some Wheel of Time insights, you too can become a member of the Patreon community. And as always, follow us on Dragonmount with social media. And thank you so much for watching.